In the quiet suburbs of Colorado, a tragedy was about to unfold that would shock the community and the nation. Kimberlee Singler, a 36-year-old mother of three, had long been known as a loving, proud parent. But in a moment of unimaginable horror, that image was shattered. What could have driven a mother to take the lives of her own children, then flee into the unknown? The truth behind Kimberlee's actions would unravel a tale of desperation, hidden struggles, and a battle for her children that would end in unspeakable violence. Kimberlee Singler's story began in Colorado, where she was born and raised. While many who knew her remember a quiet, introspective woman, details of her childhood remain somewhat elusive. Kimberlee was a private individual who didn't often share personal details, which led many to question what was hidden beneath her calm exterior. Friends and acquaintances described her as reserved, someone who kept her emotions in check and rarely let others in. But even though she appeared to keep things to herself, there were hints of a complexity within her. As Kimberlee grew older, she entered adulthood, eventually marrying and starting a family. She gave birth to 3 children: Aiden Wentz, a 7-year-old boy; Eliana, Ellie Wentz, a 9-year-old girl; and a third child, a 13-year-old daughter. To outsiders, Kimberlee's life seemed ordinary, just another suburban family trying to make their way through the ups and downs of life. She frequently posted pictures of her children on social media, showing her pride and love for them. Her bond with her kids appeared to be the one thing in her life that remained stable. However, beneath this seemingly perfect facade, Kimberlee's personal life was far from ideal. Her marriage had ended in divorce, and her relationship with her ex-husband was fraught with tension. The breakdown of their marriage led to a protracted custody battle that would consume much of Kimberlee's emotional and mental energy. Despite her struggles, she remained fiercely protective of her children, and it was clear that her role as a mother was one of the few constants in her life. While Kimberlee often spoke about her children with pride, friends began to notice subtle signs of distress. She was increasingly withdrawn, and her relationships with others seemed strained. The pressures of parenting, combined with a difficult divorce and legal battles, seemed to weigh heavily on her. Though she kept up appearances, Kimberlee's life was unraveling in ways that only a few could see. Kimberlee's emotional and psychological state in the months leading up to the tragedy was marked by extreme stress. As her custody battle continued, the strain on her personal life deepened. In early 2021, Kimberlee filed a motion in court seeking to have sole custody of her children and to relocate them to Florida. She was desperately trying to take control of a situation that was slipping away from her. Her ex-husband was fighting for primary custody, and Kimberlee's fear of losing her children was palpable. While there is no confirmed history of mental illness or violent behavior, the emotional toll of the custody battle and the personal turmoil she was experiencing likely exacerbated her mental state. The combination of legal pressure, financial difficulties, and the impending loss of her children could have been overwhelming. It's not uncommon for individuals in such high-stress situations to act in ways that are completely out of character when pushed to their limits. Mental health experts often highlight the role of psychological stress in violent behavior, particularly in situations where individuals feel they are losing everything. Kimberlee's extreme actions may have been a tragic response to the fear of losing her children, a reaction driven by the overwhelming weight of her circumstances. Kimberlee's life before the tragic incident was a constant balancing act. On the outside, she appeared to be a loving mother dedicated to her children. She frequently shared images of them, smiling and happy, in an attempt to present a picture of normalcy. But behind the scenes, things were far more complicated. The pressures she faced, emotional, legal, and financial, created a perfect storm that was slowly eroding her sense of stability. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Kimberlee's relationship with her children seemed to be one of the few things keeping her grounded. She was particularly close to Aiden and Ellie. Aiden, the quieter child, was described as sweet and affectionate, while Ellie, the older of the two, was energetic and talkative. Kimberlee often expressed pride in them, describing them as her everything. Despite these outward signs of closeness, it became apparent that she was struggling to keep up with the demands of motherhood under such intense pressure. The family's financial difficulties added to the stress Kimberlee faced. She had a history of job instability, and her ongoing legal battles drained her resources. The emotional and financial weight of her situation compounded the isolation she felt. Kimberlee's sense of control seemed to be slipping further away, and it was only a matter of time before everything began to unravel. Kimberlee had attempted to maintain a facade of normalcy for the sake of her children, but the pressure of daily life and the ongoing custody dispute were too much to bear. Something inside her began to break. It's impossible to say exactly what Kimberlee was feeling or what her internal struggles were, but the signs of her unraveling were there, hidden beneath the surface. One day, that facade finally cracked. Kimberlee made the decision that would change everything: her life, her children's lives, and the lives of those who knew her. In life, there are moments that seem to be marked by the deepest tragedies. Moments that are so incomprehensible, they defy any sense of understanding. Kimberlee Singler, a 36-year-old mother, appeared to have a life that many would envy. A cozy home in Colorado, a family of 3 children, and what looked like an ordinary, peaceful existence. Yet within the confines of that seemingly idyllic home, something was shifting, something dark and unfathomable. It was in the quiet town of Colorado, where Kimberlee had lived for years, that the cracks in her life began to show. One night, when the world seemed still, a crime unfolded, one so horrifying that it would forever alter the lives of everyone connected to it. Aiden Wentz, her 7-year-old son, and Eliana Ellie Wentz, her 9-year-old daughter, were found dead in their home. The discovery of their lifeless bodies shocked the small community and sent waves of disbelief through all who had known Kimberlee and her family. The scene, described as chilling and unfathomable, was incomprehensible. A mother, the one person who was supposed to protect her children, had become the person at the center of a crime so horrific, so brutal, that no one could comprehend how it had come to pass. Kimberlee, who had always been quiet and kept to herself, seemed to be an unlikely suspect. But the truth would be far more complex than anyone could have imagined. As the news spread rapidly, the questions multiplied. How could a mother, someone who appeared so devoted, so protective of her children, commit such an unspeakable act? Kimberlee, known for her introverted nature, was now seen as the perpetrator of a crime that defied all logic and understanding. What could have driven her to such a point of violence? Was there something hidden beneath her quiet demeanor that no one could have predicted? But there was something more perplexing about the case. While the evidence against Kimberlee was mounting, there were strange details that didn't seem to align with the conventional narrative. Kimberlee's actions following the deaths were bizarre and unnerving. It was as though she wasn't responding like someone who had just lost everything, or like someone who had just taken the lives of her own children. There was a noticeable coldness to her behavior. She seemed to move in and out of contact with law enforcement and her family members, behaving in ways that left people wondering whether she truly understood the weight of what had occurred. Was she in shock, or was something else at play? Days passed, and the investigation began to unfold slowly, with clues emerging that only deepened the mystery. Witnesses reported that Kimberlee had been in contact with someone in the UK just days before the bodies of her children were discovered. There were whispers that Kimberlee had been planning to leave, to escape. But how could someone, especially a mother caught in the middle of such a horrific tragedy, methodically plan their next steps? Was there something chillingly calculated about her actions? Was Kimberlee not just the perpetrator of a terrible crime, but also someone who had been plotting something more extensive, something beyond the tragedy at hand? Then, the most startling twist of all, Kimberlee's whereabouts were discovered in the UK. Far away from the scene of the crime, far from her children's lifeless bodies, she had fled. The revelation left authorities stunned. Why had she gone so far from Colorado? Was she running from the consequences of her actions? Or was she attempting to vanish altogether? What was she trying to escape from, and what exactly was she running toward? The question on everyone's mind was this: what had truly happened in that home in Colorado? How had Kimberlee, seemingly just another mother, struggling under the weight of life's challenges, found herself at the center of such a monstrous act. Was this the case of a mother pushed too far by the overwhelming pressure of her life? Or was there something darker, more complex, lurking beneath the surface? As the investigation continued to unfold, startling revelations began to surface, revealing unexpected twists that left the public in a state of unease. The more they uncovered, the more the case seemed to spiral, leaving the public hungry for answers that seemed elusive at best. What had driven Kimberlee to such extremes? Was it a moment of madness, or was there a carefully orchestrated plan in play that no one had yet fully understood? The mystery was just beginning. What had been uncovered so far was only the surface, and as the investigation progressed, it became clear that the truth was far more complicated and far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. In the wake of the horrific deaths of her two children, 7-year-old Aiden Wentz and his 9-year-old sister Ellie, Kimberlee Singler's disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. Law enforcement officials, still reeling from the magnitude of the crime, were left with a pressing question. Where was Kimberlee? It wasn't long before investigators realized that Kimberlee had fled the United States. Within hours of the discovery of her children's bodies, the case took a chilling turn. Kimberlee had made her way across the Atlantic, disappearing into the United Kingdom. How she had managed to leave the country without raising suspicions was an early mystery. Had she planned her escape ahead of time, meticulously arranging her travel? Or was this a hasty, impulsive flight fueled by panic and guilt? Either way, it was clear that the woman who once seemed like an ordinary, if somewhat reserved mother, was now at the center of a heinous crime, and one that would span continents. The mystery of Kimberlee's flight raised more questions than answers. While the rest of the world was processing the news of the children's deaths, Kimberlee seemed to vanish without a trace. She had withdrawn from public view, avoiding contact with family members and law enforcement. Her actions, at least in the days following the murders, were perplexing. In the aftermath of a tragedy like this, most people would expect a mother to be in profound distress, publicly mourning her children. Yet Kimberlee's response seemed cold, almost calculated. She made no attempt to explain herself or to express remorse in any public way. Soon, investigators learned that Kimberlee was in the UK. Authorities from both the United States and the UK began working together to track her down. Within days of her arrival in the UK, the US government requested her extradition. But extraditing a suspected murderer wasn't as simple as making a phone call. The legal complexities of international law added layers of delay and frustration for those hoping to bring Kimberlee back to the United States. Despite her flight, Kimberlee's capture came quickly. The circumstances surrounding her arrest raised more questions. She was not found in a dramatic, high-stakes chase or resisting arrest. On the contrary, her arrest was eerily calm. When authorities approached her, there was no violent confrontation, no attempt to flee. Kimberlee was quietly apprehended, as if she had anticipated that this moment would come. Some observers speculated that she had already reconciled herself to the inevitable. Others believed she was simply waiting for the moment when the law would catch up with her. The manner of her arrest painted a picture of a woman who had surrendered, whether physically or emotionally. Had she expected to be caught? Or was this an indication of something deeper, a sense of resignation? It was a chilling thought. Was this mother, now accused of the unimaginable, somehow prepared for the consequences of her actions? Once Kimberlee was arrested in the UK, the legal process to return her to the United States was set in motion. But this case was far from straightforward. The extradition process would involve not just paperwork and legal discussions, but a deep examination of the crimes she was accused of and the legal standards in both countries. What would be the next steps in the investigation, and how would the courts handle her case across international borders? Extradition. The process of returning a criminal suspect from one country to another is never a simple matter. In Kimberlee Singler's case, the process was fraught with legal complications. Once her arrest in the UK was confirmed, her legal team immediately filed motions to delay or block her extradition. They argued that Kimberlee would not receive a fair trial in Colorado, and that based on her mental health status, she might not be fit for prosecution. For the UK courts, the question of whether to grant the US request for extradition wasn't just a matter of following standard protocol. Legal experts were quick to point out that extradition proceedings often involved a delicate balance between legal rights and the pursuit of justice. While both the United Kingdom and the United States had treaties in place to facilitate the extradition of criminals, these agreements were not absolute. The UK courts would need to assess the evidence presented and determine whether it met the legal criteria for her return. One key consideration in the case was the severity of the charges against Kimberlee. In the US, she was accused of 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of her children. These charges carried the potential for life in prison. In the UK, the legal system would need to determine if these charges were sufficient to warrant Kimberlee's return to face trial. The UK was unlikely to approve an extradition request for a person facing lesser charges or one that might be seen as politically motivated. But Kimberlee's defense team did not go down quietly. They argued that the case was based on circumstantial evidence and that Kimberlee should not be sent back to the United States without a fair trial. They pointed to her apparent mental health struggles, seeking to use her psychological state as a defense to delay or block her extradition. Were these claims an attempt to delay the inevitable, or was there truth to them? A legitimate argument that needed to be considered by the courts. As the legal proceedings dragged on, the stakes grew higher. The United States government had already begun to prepare for Kimberlee's trial. Evidence had been gathered, and the details of the crime were beginning to take shape. Investigators in Colorado had worked tirelessly to compile a case against her, and now it was up to the UK courts to decide whether she would face justice in the United States. Back in Colorado, the legal proceedings continued to unfold. Kimberlee Singler's extradition was only the beginning of what promised to be a lengthy and contentious legal battle. Even as her legal team in the UK fought for her freedom, the US prosecutors were hard at work, preparing for a trial that would be watched by the entire nation. The charges against Kimberlee were clear. 2 counts of first-degree murder. The case against her was growing stronger with each passing day, as investigators pieced together more details of the crime. How had she planned the deaths of her children? What motivated her to commit such a horrific act? Was this a moment of desperation, or did it stem from something much deeper? These questions would soon be addressed in a court of law. While the extradition was in progress, the emotional toll on Kimberlee's surviving family members became increasingly apparent. The children's deaths were a tragedy that would forever haunt their extended family and the community. Friends and loved ones of Aiden and Ellie expressed their grief, remembering the children as full of life, dreams, and promise. In their minds, the mother who once nurtured these children had become the ultimate villain, a woman who took everything from them. The public reaction to Kimberlee's arrest and extradition was intense. Many questioned how someone could commit such an unthinkable crime, especially someone so close to the victims. As the case moved closer to trial, the public's thirst for answers grew stronger. How would Kimberlee's defense respond? Would the prosecution succeed in presenting a compelling case? And, perhaps most chilling of all, what would the final outcome of this long and painful journey be? The extradition process was the first step in a long road to justice for Aiden and Eliana. As Kimberlee was prepared for her return to the United States, the next chapter in this heartbreaking story was about to begin. Would the truth behind their deaths ever be fully understood? And what would happen when Kimberlee stood trial for the unspeakable crime she was accused of committing? The case was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. When a mother is accused of taking the lives of her own children, the shock and disbelief reverberate throughout society. The concept of maternal love, the bond between a mother and her children, forged by biological and emotional ties, leaves the world struggling to understand how it could break so violently. For Kimberlee Singler, a woman accused of murdering her 2 children, 7-year-old Aiden Wentz and his 9-year-old sister Eliana, Ellie, the questions were particularly haunting. How could a mother, once seen as caring and nurturing, commit such an unimaginable act? Psychologists and criminologists were left grappling with the motivations behind Kimberlee's actions. What could have driven her to kill her own children? The answers, they soon realized, were complex and multifaceted, emerging from a blend of psychological, emotional, and circumstantial factors. While the public may have first seen Kimberlee as a mother trying to hold it all together, the reality of her psychological state, as well as her personal struggles, revealed a darker, more disturbing side of her. Experts in the field of criminology agree that the motivations behind such crimes are rarely simple. The psychological profile of someone capable of committing filicide, killing one's own child, often involves a combination of overwhelming stressors, emotional turmoil, and mental health crises. For Kimberlee, these factors were compounded by years of personal struggles, some of which were known only to her closest family members, while others went largely unnoticed by the public. Kimberlee's calm and collected exterior, particularly in the days following the deaths of her children, was a behavior that left those around her perplexed. Reports indicated that Kimberlee appeared emotionally detached, almost indifferent to the tragedy. Those close to her described her as seemingly unfazed by the magnitude of the crime. To outsiders, this raised immediate red flags. How could a mother be so unshaken by the brutal deaths of her own children? Psychologists suggested that Kimberlee might have been experiencing an emotional numbness, possibly linked to deep psychological trauma or a mental health disorder that prevented her from processing the enormity of her actions. Dr. Jane Williams, a forensic psychologist who has studied maternal filicide, explained that such a crime is often linked to the perpetrator's mental breakdown. In cases of maternal filicide, we often see a collapse of mental and emotional functioning, Dr. Williams stated. The mother may feel trapped, overwhelmed by the pressures of life, and in extreme cases, may not be able to see any way out but through the act of violence. It's a tragic and heartbreaking consequence of an emotional crisis. Kimberlee's history, once revealed, painted a picture of a woman struggling with more than just the challenges of motherhood. It became apparent that she had been battling personal demons, possibly dealing with undiagnosed mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, or even postpartum depression. While she presented herself as a loving mother to those around her, her internal struggles were likely hidden, leading to a slow unraveling that no one had recognized until it was too late. What made Kimberlee's case particularly chilling was the premeditated nature of her flight to the United Kingdom. Evidence suggested that she had made plans to leave the U.S. before the discovery of her children's deaths. This detail raised questions about her motives and whether her actions were a result of carefully considered decisions. Did Kimberlee see her children as obstacles to a life she wanted for herself? Was her escape to the UK her way of escaping, not just from the law, but from a life she found unbearable? For some criminologists, the idea that Kimberlee viewed her children as burdens was a disturbing possibility. While there was no definitive evidence to support this theory, experts have pointed out that some mothers who commit filicide do so because they view their children as impediments to their personal freedom. These mothers may see their children as obstacles to pursuing a new life or achieving personal goals. Kimberlee's decision to leave the country so abruptly, and her apparent indifference in the aftermath of the murders, could suggest that she had in some way dehumanized her children, perhaps seeing them as hindrances to her own survival. Others suggested that the cause of her actions could be more deeply rooted in her mental health. The idea that Kimberlee may have been experiencing a mental health crisis, one that led her to snap under the weight of her personal and familial pressures, was a theory that gained traction among some experts. While no clinical diagnosis was made public, there were whispers about the possibility of Kimberlee suffering from untreated or undiagnosed mental illnesses. Mental health experts pointed to the emotional detachment she exhibited after the deaths as a key indicator that Kimberlee may have been in the midst of a psychological breakdown. Criminologists also examined the broader context of Kimberlee's life. Her relationship with her partner, financial difficulties, and feelings of isolation were factors that might have contributed to her state of mind. Reports suggested that she had been struggling to manage the stresses of single motherhood, while also dealing with personal issues that may have further intensified her emotional instability. Was the strain of caring for two young children, Aiden and Ellie, combined with the pressures of her own life, enough to push Kimberlee to the breaking point? While it remains impossible to definitively pinpoint the exact combination of factors that led Kimberlee to murder her children, it is clear that her actions were not the result of a single event or cause. Instead, they were the tragic consequence of multiple, complex factors that culminated in an unspeakable act. As the investigation unfolded, public reactions to Kimberlee Singler's crime were swift and intense. The brutal deaths of Aiden and Eliana shocked the community, with many struggling to reconcile the image of the mother they thought they knew with the reality of the woman accused of taking her children's lives. In the days following the discovery of their deaths, social media platforms, news outlets, and local communities became abuzz with speculation and outrage. For many, the question that haunted the public was how a mother could commit such an unspeakable act. The idea of a mother killing her own children is so deeply foreign to most people that it often defies understanding. For the residents of the small town in Colorado, Kimberlee had once been seen as a quiet, reserved figure, someone they might pass in the grocery store or see walking through the park with her children. They had no reason to suspect that the woman they knew could be capable of such violence. This incongruity between the image of the woman they thought they knew and the accusations against her created a wave of disbelief and shock in the community. Public opinion turned sharply against Kimberlee as more details of the case emerged. As her arrest and subsequent extradition to the United Kingdom made headlines, the public's outrage grew. How could a mother, seemingly so ordinary, take the lives of her own children? The reactions from those who had known Kimberlee varied. Some expressed disbelief, unable to fathom that someone they had once seen as a mother figure could commit such a heinous act. Others, however, reported that they had seen warning signs, subtle indications that Kimberlee may have been struggling long before the tragedy. The broader public reaction to the case, including comments on social media, became heated. While some focused on the emotional devastation of the children's deaths, others began to question the justice system and whether Kimberlee would face the appropriate consequences for her actions. The debate centered on how mental health issues were often ignored in cases like this, and whether Kimberlee's apparent breakdown should be taken into consideration during her trial. Some wondered whether the legal system would show her any leniency due to possible mental health struggles, while others demanded the harshest punishment possible for the crime. The case also highlighted a larger issue: how society grapples with the psychological profiles of mothers who commit filicide. Filicide is not just a tragic occurrence, it is a psychological phenomenon that often leaves many unanswered questions. Was Kimberlee truly insane when she committed her crimes? Or was this an act driven by deeper, unaddressed emotional distress? In the coming months, as the extradition battle continued and the case moved toward trial, the public's fascination with Kimberlee's story only deepened. The world watched, hoping for answers, but perhaps realizing that some answers might never come. As we reflect on the tragic case of Kimberlee Singler, the details of this heartbreaking story stand out with stark clarity. A mother, who seemed to lead an ordinary life, stands accused of an act beyond comprehension. The death of her two children, 7-year-old Aiden Wentz and his 9-year-old sister Eliana, Ellie. The crime shocked not only their local community in Colorado, but people across the world. These children had their whole lives ahead of them, and yet their futures were tragically cut short in a way that has left a haunting impact on everyone involved. Kimberlee's life before this tragedy appeared to be one of quiet normalcy, but beneath the surface, she was grappling with deep emotional and psychological struggles. What pushed her to commit such an unthinkable act? Was it the mounting pressures of motherhood, an unaddressed mental health issue, or something more complex? Many theories exist, but none can truly answer why a mother would end the lives of her own children. As the investigation unraveled, it became apparent that Kimberlee's actions were not impulsive, but rather deeply calculated. The fact that she fled to the United Kingdom shortly after the murders raised the question of premeditation. Some experts suggest that Kimberlee may have planned this escape, seeing it as her only way out of the perceived hopelessness of her situation. Others wonder whether her mental state had deteriorated to the point where she was no longer capable of seeing the consequences of her actions. Regardless of the reasons, the result was the same. 2 young lives were tragically lost, and Kimberlee stands accused of committing a crime that goes against the very essence of motherhood. This case has sparked profound questions about the limits of justice, the nature of crime, and the psychological complexities that lie beneath the surface of human behavior. It's not just about the legal battles that followed her arrest in the UK, the extradition process, or the charges brought against her. The emotional impact of this case on the public has been just as devastating. The shock and disbelief surrounding a mother committing such a heinous act challenge everything we think we know about familial bonds and the protective instincts of a mother. In the weeks and months that followed her arrest, Kimberlee's mental health became a central point of focus. Could she have been suffering from a mental illness that led her to believe that her only option was to end the lives of her own children? Many experts have argued that the pressures of motherhood, coupled with personal struggles and perhaps undiagnosed mental health issues, may have contributed to her state of mind at the time. This, however, raises another uncomfortable question. What responsibility does society bear for failing to identify and intervene in cases where mothers are struggling with mental health? The public's reaction to Kimberlee's actions has been one of profound grief and outrage. How could a mother, who was supposed to nurture and protect her children, commit such a horrific crime? It's a question that many will struggle with for years to come. The case forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that not all crimes are committed by strangers or individuals who we can easily identify as evil. Sometimes the perpetrators are people we know, mothers, fathers, and family members, who may be hiding their own pain or suffering in ways that aren't immediately visible. Kimberlee's story is tragic not only because of the crime itself, but because it forces us to acknowledge the fragility of the human mind. It reminds us that behind every person, there may be a complex set of internal struggles, mental health issues, personal demons, and invisible battles that can manifest in ways that are hard to understand or predict. No one knows what was truly going on in Kimberlee's mind in the days leading up to the murders, but the tragic loss of Aidan and Ellie serves as a stark reminder of the importance of mental health awareness and intervention. This case also forces us to examine the nature of crime and justice. What happens when the very person society expects to be a protector becomes the perpetrator? And what does justice look like in cases where the perpetrator is a mother, someone who is supposed to love and care for her children above all else? Kimberlee's actions are not only a crime against her children, but also a violation of the very principles that define parenthood. As the legal process continues, the question of how to bring justice to the victims and how to ensure that such a tragedy is prevented in the future will remain at the forefront of this case. The emotional toll this case has taken on the community, the surviving family members, and everyone involved is undeniable. There is no easy resolution and no simple explanation for why Kimberlee chose to take the lives of her own children. The story of Aidan Wentz and Eliana Ellie will remain etched in the memories of those who knew them, and their loss will continue to be felt for years to come. As we continue to watch this case unfold, we want to hear from you. What do you think motivated Kimberlee Singler to commit such a heartbreaking act? Was it the overwhelming pressures of motherhood, perhaps undiagnosed mental health struggles, or something more complex? And how do you believe the legal system should respond to a crime so deeply rooted in familial relationships? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We're eager to hear your perspectives. This case has raised important questions about mental health, justice, and the sometimes invisible struggles of individuals. Your opinion matters, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you. How can we better support mothers and families before tragedies like this occur? What can we do as a society to prevent these kinds of heart-wrenching incidents? If you found this video insightful or thought-provoking, please like it and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth stories and updates. Your support allows us to continue exploring the complexities of human behavior, criminal justice, and the stories that need to be told. Sharing this video with others will help keep the conversation going and provide a space for reflection and discussion. The story of Aiden Wentz and Eliana, Ellie, may have reached its tragic conclusion, but it leaves us with critical questions that need to be addressed. As always, we thank you for joining us in this exploration of one of the most complex and tragic true crime cases.